live! Woo! And we have terrible feedback, so we're working on that. SPSM folks, just a shot really quickly. We're not sure where we're getting at. Let's see. Did we? No, we did not. We're still working with the feedback SPSM, but we're excited that you're here tonight. They'll just be patient, and maybe it's Mark's speed. Yes, I think that's it. So welcome, SPSM. We are so excited that you're here. For those of you who are following along, it's hashtag SPSM on Twitter. Please do like and go to our Facebook page. You can also go to our blog at spsmchat.com where you can read up about our program tonight. We have a wonderful group of guests who are here to chat with you. And I don't have the right screen up. And we have a wonderful group of guests who are here to chat with you. I'm at Doc Foreman. I am here as the moderator, pirate hat firmly in place. Twirl and swirl. We have Stuck on Social Work, who is moderating the SPSM chat feed. If you need to get a message to any of us, I want you to go ahead and message SPSM chat or Stuck on Social Work, or message our handy dandy IT guy, Mr. Tony Wood. I'm going to unmute him. So we're still making the camera work here tonight, kids. There we go. Tony, say hi to the people.
Hi, everybody.
So get messages to Tony if you need to help send anything up to our guests who are joining us. And of course, we have our favorite co-moderator. We have Dr. Bart Andrews. I'm unmuting you. Say hi to the, well, maybe not. It's not liking me tonight, Tony. It won't unmute.
Oh, Dr. Foreman.
I can't get it to unmute. Bart, wave to the folks. Everybody, this is Dr. Bart Andrews, who's Mike. I can't unmute. Dr. Bart Andrews is Vice President of the Crisis Center in St. Louis, and I'm going to get it wrong. He just, of course, launched his wonderful virtual reality platform for youth who are in crisis called Voice, and so we hope that he'll check in with us about how that went today. And
so that means that he's going to be a mime for the whole...
I don't know why it won't undo his mute. I can't figure it out. Bart, can you click on yourself and see if you can undo your mute?
There we go.
Ah, we got it. So Bart,
Yay.
tell us a little bit about yourself. Your project just launched this week.
I'm really excited. Yeah, we've got youth on the site. So the agency that I'm at is Behavioral Health Response, an amazing crisis agency in St. Louis, Missouri. As I said last week, we just got selected right for the Region Award for the St. Louis area in terms of coordination and care collaboration with which is huge. So we got some recognition for that. And I just submitted a grant on Friday afternoon to expand our Youth Connection helpline service, which includes chat and texting among ongoing follow-up for calls into the crisis line for youth to expand that into St. Louis City. And so we're hoping that we'll basically have a region-wide Youth Connection helpline with chat, text, outreach, and ongoing follow-up with youth that hit the crisis system through pretty much of the St. Louis metropolitan region, which would be fantastic. It's great to be here tonight, April, and we've got a great show. I cannot wait to hear from these guys because they are doing interesting stuff.
And I'm pretty excited too. Big shout out to Reno, to Carl, to Linda, to Kendra. You're all coming on. You're doing great. I'm going to start with Dr. Glenn Coppersmith, and you are not muted. Hooray. Glenn, can you introduce yourself to all the folks at SPSM?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Glenn Coppersmith. That's an efficient Glenn, so I only have one N in my name. Very important. I'm getting over a cold, so forgive all of the coughing that's going to come out of me today. So I've got an interesting background, a combination of psychology and computer science and mathematics. And so this idea of using social media and sort of computer science and machine learning techniques to give us information, quantifiable information about mental health is something that's just very near and dear to my heart. And so I'm super excited to be here talking to all of you guys about it tonight. We've done some work over the last year that I'm sure we're going to talk about through the course of the hour. But what we really hope to get out of this whole thing is an appreciation for what it is that you guys still need as a field. Where can we give you something that's going to be useful? how can we use the analysis techniques that we've got to improve the mental health of this country, because it's a problem that, as far as I can tell, like I got to tell you guys, right, it's only going to get worse from here. So I'm super excited to talk to all of you.
So I want to reiterate that for the SPSM crowd. So, and this is especially for you, Dr. Bill Schmitz, because you have suddenly had some wish lists as your sort of insight about technology has grown. What things could we be using big data for that we think could really improve suicide prevention? Glenn Coppersmith, Efficient Glenn, 1N, has said
Yes.
to you that if you have a wish list, he might be interested in figuring out a way to make it happen. This is your great chance to tweet or put it in the comments below. Let Stuck on Social work or let Tony Wood know, and we'll try to, at a couple of the breaks, get to some questions or some wishes for them. Glenn, thank you for asking. We also have Mark here. Mark, I think you were the source of the feedback, so I'm going to unmute you maybe. Can you unmute yourself maybe?
I can.
So Mark, introduce yourself to the people and tell us about yourself.
Sure. I'm Mark Dredzy. I'm a professor at Johns Hopkins. I'm in computer science, so that means I'm not a real doctor, as many of you are. And basically what I've been working on since I got my PhD, which wasn't that long ago, is natural language processing and machine learning, which is roughly speaking teaching computers to understand how to process speech and written language. So I've been doing that for a while, and in the past couple of years, I thought it would be interesting to apply these technologies to social media, specifically for public health. And so I've been looking at a large number of different things like influenza and mental health, which is why I'm here tonight. We also look at vaccines, drug use, pollution, other things, tobacco control, things beyond that I can't remember now.
How did you hook up with
yeah.
Glenn, Mark? He seems kind of like a no account.
How did I hook up? We worked next to each other. His office was next door to mine. So it only took like, 2 years to meet him.
I wasn't.
No, I met him on the first day.
From 2008 until December, and now I'm part-time at Hopkins. But Mark and I, we spent years sitting next to each other and talked about all sorts of great things that we should do, and not until mental health do we actually get to sit down and do something together.
So what was it about mental health that allowed you guys to start a project?
Well, I think Glenn is, Glenn is very passionate about this topic, and I can let him speak to some of the reasons why. I mean, for me, I was actually very, very skeptical, I'll be honest. This was something I thought about for a while of working on, and I just thought you couldn't do it using social media data. I didn't really believe that the data was there to support it. So Glenn came to me one day and said, well, I am working on it, and I do think I have interesting results. And I spent about 3 months trying to prove him wrong. And when I couldn't figure out why he was wrong, yeah.
What did you do for 3 months to prove him wrong?
Well, he kept sending me results, and I'm like, no, you forgot to do this, or I'm sure if you add this control, your results will go away. And he tried everything I could think of, and then I believe that maybe we're onto something. I mean,
and he was right on a couple of them, right? So he certainly found a couple of flaws with the methodology. Let's not make it sound like I had it right the first time. This is research.
If you think about it, it's kind of amazing. I mean, people have come to me over the years with a lot of different things they want to study using social media. Some of them are very doable, like influenza or vaccines. Some of them are not very doable, like sexually transmitted diseases, medical device errors. Those things are not going to show up on social media. And mental health was always one of those things I thought, who's going to tweet about mental health-related topics, right? Who's going to tweet about their depression or PTSD or any of these things, or suicide? And it wasn't until Glenn really showed me the data that I believed that this data was there and you could do something with it.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that's what's been sort of really interesting to us is sort of the understanding that not only will they, but they'll do it at much more accurate rates than they will talking to their doctors or talking to their friends, that there's something a little bit magical about social media that people become frank and become more accurate reporters, we think. And so this is maybe our first chance to have direct access to this kind of data.
Right, and we see that in other venues. I mean, certainly in other cases, that people are more honest on places like social media, like tobacco, right, where people don't necessarily want to tell the doctor they're smoking, but they're happy to talk to their friends about what they smoke and the brands of cigarettes and all these things. So it's not so unusual from what we know about surveys and interactions with the doctors that people would be more frank on social media. It's just very unexpected in my mind to see this by mental health, but maybe if you guys have seen the data, you're not that surprised. It just took me a while to come around to it.
It's sort of like the data where, like, if people are all sitting in a room and you turn out the lights, even though sort of logically it's the same, but people will be more honest in the dark. It's just that one step of interpersonal removal seems to really improve people's reporting.
And so I should point out one thing here. Some of the signals that we're getting are not explicit signals about mental health. They're sort of implicit. And the fact we're drawing some power from the fact that people are just talking a lot about their life. And it's not necessarily that they're saying pointed mental health things, but the fact that there is this sort of running dialogue for a lot of people, that their tweet stream is like, this is just what's going on day to day in my life. And there's a lot there that little weak signals, and this is not like someone necessarily screaming about something that they're, I'm really hurting right now or something like that. It's really, really weak signals that we're able to, through the power of machine learning and enough data, pull some of these things out.
Well, can you explain your project to the folks who are watching? Because, in fact, they may or may not have read the blog, but you might want to let them know what you're up to.
Mark, I'll let you go first so I don't start coughing.
Sure. So I think we're very generally we're interested in public health, and so we're looking at populations as a whole, not any individual. And really what we want to do is see, can we track different types of mental health conditions as they show up in social media. And we're doing that by what people are saying, a little bit about how they're behaving, but mostly what they're saying. And there's kind of two types of information that you can say for us to try and figure out what are the relevant mental health conditions. One are explicit things. So people will say, on one end of the scale, I am depressed, right? That's pretty obvious. But then they'll say much more subtle things like, it's hard to get out of bed this morning. I don't feel like, I don't feel like getting off the couch, which doesn't necessarily mean you're depressed, but you're more likely to say that if you're suffering from depression than if you're not. And then kind of to the extreme, there are much more subtle, implicit aspects of language that are indicative of whether or not you're depressed. Glenn can speak more to these, but people tend to use words in different ways, talk about themselves versus others in different proportions, and all these things are known, not through our work, but through previous work, to be correlated with different mental health conditions such as depression. And what we're doing is we're trying to mine millions and millions of tweets to see if we can identify these signals automatically. And by doing that, we want to be able to answer really broad questions like, which areas in the United States or which types of people suffer from different mental health conditions in different ways. What are the impacts on those conditions? When an event happens in the media or there's a major event happening in pop culture, how does that impact people's mental health when they're suffering from these conditions? So it's really not about an individual, but it's about mining millions of statements from millions of different people to try and identify these population-level trends in different mental health conditions.
So let me make sure I understand, Mark. So you can measure both possibly individual streams and look at someone's individual stream for what I read and predict their individual risk, but you could also look at population risk and say, are there areas where there seems to be more depression or more risk for something like a suicide or an adverse mental health issue?
That's right. And it's important to realize that we're really focused on the population level because it's very hard to make any judgments about an individual. Just think about it. If you just read someone's Twitter stream, how likely are you to make a clinical diagnosis? It's really hard to do. But, obviously there are some cases where you can, but that's really the exception, right? And so generally what we're looking at is one person was saying, well, one person, this person has a 60-40 chance of depression. But now let's look at 100,000 people like them, right? And say in that whole group, what is the proportion? And over that large sample, and when we aggregate the data, we can get really robust trends. So to give you an example, one thing we did was with post-traumatic stress disorder. So what we did is we built a system that could identify language associated with post-traumatic stress disorder, and this is things like people, there's things talking about nightmares, for example, difficulty sleeping. These are the sorts of things that are more likely to show up if you have PTSD. Obviously, people who don't have PTSD also have nightmares. But so just that little bit of signal, we looked at tweets coming from U.S. military bases and tweets coming from the larger population. And we said, let's make the assumption that if it's coming from military base, it's probably someone in the military. And we said, are these people in the military showing greater rates of PTSD than the larger population? The reason we asked that question is because we know that's true in general, The question is, can we find that's true on Twitter? And the answer was absolutely yes. Not only is it the case that people in the military have higher rates of PTSD in their tweets than the rest of the population, but even within the military, if you break it down into people who deploy overseas and people who have a homeland security mission, there's a difference there, where the deployment overseas have higher rates of talking about PTSD. And so it's really surprising because it's something that we all know is true and we can measure on Twitter, and it's really trivial to measure these sorts of things on Twitter compared to the resources you need if you want to measure it.
Trivial for you, Mark.
Well, it didn't take us millions of dollars in many years.
So
Although we're happy to take millions of dollars to do it. It did not take that.
Over millions of dollars.
Believe me, we are very happy to take money because this is important work, and we talk about funding for this work. This is wonderful work, and we're showing that, in fact, for very economical funding, we can do marvelous, innovative things. This is a shout-out for some of the folks who are a little bit worried about getting lost in some of the terminology, and specifically for you, Dr. Schmitz. I mean, basically what they're talking about is validation studies, where they're using Twitter to see if the Twitter is picking up on the elevated PTSD, if their way of measuring PTSD in the Twitter sphere shows elevations where they would expect to find it. So this is just basically a way of validating this as a measurement tool, right?
Yeah, exactly right. I forgot I have to put up my public health hat sometimes when I talk. So we're really talking about a
really broad audience. You've got like clinicians and researchers and advocates and people with lived experience. You've got the whole enchilada tonight, Mark.
Right. So really, when we do this work, we start with validation. So for example, we'll find a study published on the language of depression, where they've collected writing samples from clinically depressed people. They analyze those writing samples and they say people with depression speak in this way as opposed to this way, right? So we take the Twitter data and we do the exact same thing, and if our results match, then we go out and do something new. We go and study some new condition that's never been studied when it comes to language, like PTSD, or, I mean, Glenn has a dozen things that he can list. And there's been no previous work to study it. So everything we find, we are finding for the first time, and the reason we trust that it's right is because we did that initial validation step.
Fantastic. So we're just going to do one more question, then I'm going to switch to Bart. So this is for either Glenn or for Mark. So what were the big challenges? Because, I mean, you are telling these people that basically you are wizards, and that for not very much money and with relative ease, despite the fact that it's a lot of math and a lot of computing power, you're able to harness Twitter and this computing power to tell us great truths about our communities in ways we never could before. Magic. What were some of the challenges in doing this kind of program?
So I'm going to fight the premise on this question, right? It's not magic, and in fact, the only reason that we're able to do any of this is because we actually have strong partnerships with some people from the psych field that are practicing clinicians who can look at this stuff. And I have a mental health background, but I couldn't tell you some of the things that they pulled out of these streams that, oh yeah, I would totally expect that. This makes total sense. And so there was a step of validation sort of throughout this whole process, where as we would find something, I would look at it and say, oh boy, I think something's wrong with the algorithm. And they would look at it and say, oh no, yeah, of course, they drink more, or something like that, right? And so there's certainly nothing magic about all of this. This has been a long slog with a lot of hands helping us.
So how did you get clinicians and IT people to talk to each other?
Well, so if you walk into a room and you state that you have a degree in psychology, they assume you're a psychologist, and they don't know that you're a CS guy. So that's the trick. And so you just have to fool them the first time, and then after you show them something cool, then maybe they believe you and can deal with you for a little while at least. I mean, maybe they've stopped returning my calls now, but.
So you're talking about having really strong. We talk about this. We think that the most innovative work is where we get data scientists and people or technology experts who have figured out a way to talk with clinicians, and clinicians who can talk back to them, which is really challenging because we don't always. Sometimes we sort of miss each other, right?
And we have different training. We use different words for the same thing. I mean, there's a lot of issues wrapped up in there, but you're exactly right. I mean, that's where all the power comes, when you can bring the diverse experience from working in the field and what we get hiding behind our computer screens, and finding some common ground and finding some common problems we can attack. Exciting times.
I'm with you. So Bart, what did you think about all this?
So I think it's fascinating. I think one of the things that I'm really impressed with is that we're taking seriously that people are living in a digital space, right? And so when we think about public health, we often rely on public health data that's come through other agencies, public clinics, hospitals, right? So the data is filtering through all these other sources. And the cool thing that Mark and Glenn are doing is they're going right to the source. And because of social media, because that's where people are living, we're actually able to go directly to the public, and the public can teach us in both, explicit and implicit ways about what their life is like. And I find that utterly fascinating. I think when I read through their article, I understood most of the prepositions in the article, and a few of the verbs were clear. But one of the interesting things I found that when going through it was that how some of it isn't obvious. It wouldn't be obvious that this was connected to maybe depression, or this was connected to cancer, but the data can help us find those threads, right? So it's really interesting things to see, and I'm really curious to hear what next steps are. What are we going to do with this? Because I'm really interested. I really believe that for us to have an impact, particularly in mental health, we have got to make an impact in a very public way. That the idea that mental health problems are social health problems, and that the best way to intervene is socially. And the more we can do that in larger groups, the more impact I believe we're going to have. And as you and I were talking about, April, earlier, suicide is becoming an easier thing for people to talk about. Depression is becoming an easier thing to talk about, and I think some of that is because of social media. And so I'm curious, what do we do with this as we validate these things and we're able to get data from social media sites? What do we do with that data? What are the next steps or things I'm really curious about?
So these are excellent questions. We're going to take, before we answer that, a quick pause, because in our fun and games with technology, I may have forgotten to warn Glenn and Mark about the bowl.
The bowl?
Yeah, the bowl. Yeah.
I see how it is.
Yeah, well, it's traumatizing. It's traumatizing.
All right, bring it on. I'm ready.
It is the bowl of interesting questions.
Or not.
Or
Okay.
not. We don't know. There's
Yeah.
some questions in here. I'm going to draw one. You hope I'm appropriate. Maybe the question's a good question. Maybe it's not. You don't know ahead of time.
Okay.
And you just have to answer.
Sounds good. I'm game.
And I told Bart he gets to go last.
Do we get a lifeline?
If you can call somebody to answer for you, absolutely. We're in. No one's asked for that yet, but I'm in. I'm up for it. So we're gonna do this. I know, the pirate hat.
Pirate hat.
Guilty social media confessions.
Oh, I got a good one here. So I've been studying Twitter for a number of years. You want to know when I actually started tweeting?
When?
About a year ago. So for years, so this is, I would like to say this, like, let me put on my scientist hat and pretend like I've got a good reason for doing this, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to study the sample from an objective point of view. And the truth of the matter is I just didn't get Twitter. And it took me a while of actually studying it from like the academic hat on to actually understand anything about it and say, oh, wow, this is actually kind of neat. You've got this human sensor thing. Like there are people there that respond to things. So I'm a social media newbie.
That's okay. I have to tell you, you're just pretty much like everyone else who's on the show who studies Twitter. They're like, and then after a while, I tried out tweeting. And Tony will tell you that I threw a big fit, was crying on the floor to get me slightly drunk and forced me to follow people a couple of years ago but I get it. I'm there now. I love it. How about you, Mark? Any guilty social media confessions?
Yeah, I've never tweeted. The closest I've ever come is my baby daughter grabbed my phone and pushed all the buttons, and when I took it back from her, she had half composed a tweet. So that's the closest I've ever come to tweeting. And now the pressure's just on because whatever I say, it's the first thing I've said after however long I've been on. So even though I check Twitter like religiously and I follow tons of people, and I've been very tempted to reply to things people have said, I've never done it.
Wow. I'm going to tell you, hashtag HITSM. Like, just follow that hashtag and talk to people. Like, I've been tagging that. They would be dying to meet you because you're like the flu and vaccine guy, right?
I think I'm just going to skip to Pinterest or Tumblr and just not do Twitter.
If you do Tumblr, Krista Roach was on last week. She's our Tumblr queen. She knows all about it.
I don't understand Tumblr, I'll admit it. It's like cat pictures, is that the deal?
You know, there's nothing wrong with cat or squirrel pictures, right, Bart?
Oh, squirrels too? I thought it was just cats.
Yeah, whatever
Squirrels
gets you through
are-
the week.
Squirrels are cool.
Okay.
Everybody knows that.
Squirrels.
I'm learning things on social media.
So my guilty social media confession was like, and that I would get on sort of anonymously, like back in the day. It's like at various points I have friends who are very technology oriented. I am not, and so I would sort of do various forays. But the very first blog I ever followed, and like if I ever got to meet her, it would be like such an honor, was this woman who is a sex worker named Sarah Catherine. And I learned everything about stripping in the sex work industry, and I felt just so fascinated. I maybe read her journal every day for years. And then, then she was fancy and wrote books and spoke at Ivy League universities. And then I was like, see, it was a total like worthwhile use of time, but I couldn't stop myself. Bart?
I've got so many. You guys, these are some of the. That was pretty good, April. These are pretty safe social media confessions. I've got many, but none of them are particularly safe. I'll start with an easy one. So my boss said to tweet a few years back to start getting on Twitter. So I tried to create an account and got on, and I really had no idea, none how it all worked or what it all was. And when I was going through, I actually posted some stuff, some William S. Burroughs poetry, right? And some quotes and some stuff that I thought was really cool that I thought connected with this thread. And so the next thing I know, I've got like 20 or 30 of these young goth female followers on my account, which was not what I expected, wanted, and I kind of freaked out and completely bailed on Twitter for about 3 years. Apparently, if you want to get goth followers, if you tweet William S. Burroughs poetry, it's a good way to do that. And so that's my safe confession.
That was safe? What's the... I'm curious.
That was really safe. That was really safe.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll stay on once the hangout goes off air and we can hear the rest of them.
So one of the things that Bart was asking as we sort of took a break for a little bit of for the bowl, what he was saying is once we have this data, like what could we do with it? What are some of the possibilities of this kind of technology for the field of mental health, especially in terms of public health?
So I'm going to say something dangerous and contrary to Mark, and hopefully we can start fighting and you guys can watch. All right, it's going to be entertaining. So as much as Mark cares about the population level, sorry, there's an awful lot that can be done at the individual level too. And the truth of the matter is that's harder and more dangerous. And this is part of the reason that we haven't done it yet. But really, if we want to make any sort of impact here and real change, what we've got to be able to do is to be able to inform the way that health, that care is being provided to these patients. And so this is, as we're starting to understand how these techniques are working, and some of the work that we're doing this year is expanding it to a much broader range of conditions, we're starting to, I would hope, be able to build the equivalent of something like a thermometer for mental health, right? This is one data point that you can get that's telling you something about how your patient is doing, and you can watch this, you can see how they're doing, but getting some sort of objective measures about how your patient is doing, I suspect, is going to be a bit of a game changer. You could perhaps see some trends before you are able to catch it in some sort of a therapy session or something else, right? There's a possibility there that is really, really interesting. But there's a lot more that we have to do yet. And I said it's dangerous, and here's why. Mark hinted at this earlier, the 60-40 comment, that the way in which we do this is we can take 100,000 people and look at them as a group, and that allows us to get some of them wrong. At the individual level, you can't do that. You have to be on, and you have to be exactly right as a very, very high percentage of the time.
Happening though in face-to-face therapy where we're like super accurate?
Yeah, but that is sort of a well-established tradition, right? And so there's a difference.
Wildly inaccurate sometimes. I'm just going to say that we have really huge error rates. That's what the scientists make fun of us.
Yeah, I suspect that we upstart computer scientists coming in here trying to solve your problems, which I'd like to. We're not, right? We're trying to help. But there has been some skepticism expressed towards us for this sort of you're going to get one wrong, and they're right. We're going to get one wrong, but I'm glad to hear you say that. Hey, everyone gets them wrong. It's a draft in progress.
Let's be really clear, and if somebody wants to argue with me, then bring the math and I'll humbly concede. But the issue quite simply is that we've known for a very long time as a field that we often get things wrong. And in fact, our interpretation of what's going on can be very highly subjective. Our face-to-face reports have a lot of accuracy issues. There's a lot of error in the measures that we use. And if we are, and Bart's going to come on, and I'll let Bart comment on this, where it's not like our hit rate is fantastic, using traditional.
Horrible. It's horrible. So April, one of my favorite stats for mental health professionals, they were looking at predicting future violence. So they had a bunch of psychologists sit down and predict who's going to be violent. So it's a 50-50 option, right? They're going to be violent, they're not going to be violent, right? We were wrong 2/3 of the time. So think about the thing. So the thing that always amazed me is mental health professionals were worse than chance at predicting future violence, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if you use a statistical engine, if you use some kind of a statistical assessment, you improve that significantly. Generally, statistical evaluations of people's future behavior far exceed a professional's face-to-face evaluation. And so that one of the things I'm really looking for, and I know that Mark and Glenn are working on this, there's going to be there's a need for human involvement in the process, right? And when you combine human clinical skills and training with good technology is really when we get the most accurate way of assessing and the best way to intervene. So I'm really hoping for a future where, in fact, we have this symbiosis of really good technical data coming into clinicians, and then clinicians using their people skills to interpret that and work with people and use that data in a way that with each individual. In terms of, and I love their honesty, and humility, but 60-40, I'm cool with that. I mean, that's more than we got now, right? So, and I think that, and there's things that we can build in, and if you're wrong, better be wrong in a, hey, we were checking on this and it turns out it isn't the case, then missing something, right? So, and there's ways that you can build that in. So I'm excited about this. It's really cool.
So I've got to say something here. That stat is from my dissertation. I used that. That was the whole reason for what I did looking at aggression was that precisely. And so I won't tell you how good we did, but it was better than the clinicians.
Why won't you tell us how good you did?
Because I can't remember the number. I think it's 80%. But I can't remember the number.
So
I will go downstairs and find my dissertation.
Like almost twice as accurate, right?
It's almost 3 times.
Yeah, like bipolar disorders are misdiagnosed 8 times for every 1 time they're diagnosed correctly, for example. Like we really and believe me, nobody goes through my record and makes me show my work when I write a diagnosis down just so that I can get reimbursed. And there are people who pride themselves in being good diagnosticians, but in fact, most people in the mental health field don't really have to do the differentials, and I think this is one of those reasons why we trend away with we don't want to label people. And so so one of the things that's showing up in the Twitter feed is saying, well, maybe what we could use this for is analysis of understanding diagnostically what's happening for the folks that whose data we're mining, but also then learn what language they use to refer to themselves, so that our referential language, if we are going to label folks, is sort of more in harmony with their self-awareness or their self-perception.
Right. So to go back to the question, to just give 2 examples. So some of the stuff I think we think about is what sort of studies can we do that shed light on these conditions or the behaviors of people with these conditions that would then help people in turn in the field to diagnose them or treat them. And that's where we spend a lot of our time thinking. We've avoided this kind of individual patient view, but it's coming. So if you just look at the new iOS, they have this new health platform, right? Mm-hmm. And there's now a whole part built into the iPhone that's designed for health. And I'm sure people, someone will go to the App Store while I'm talking and search for mental health or depression or therapist, and I guarantee you'll already find apps. So people are going to build apps in this space. And that means people are going to use apps in this space. And that means as a therapist, someone's going to walk into your office and they're going to say, by the way, I've been using this app. And the question is, what are you going to do? Are you going to say, I want nothing to do with that? That's not part of what I do. Or are you going to say, all right, well, if you're going to be using these apps anyway, let me or let the community try and help these apps do a better job of whatever it is they're trying to do. And I think that's what we're going to end up doing, is we're going to realize that patients are going to be using these technologies, just like they're using these technologies for weight loss and other forms of health. So the question is just, okay, how can we make these better technologies that we can do a better job helping these people? And it's going to be very difficult to get right from an accuracy standpoint, from a privacy standpoint, but it doesn't mean people aren't going to try and fail and succeed at it.
I would like to.
Again, it's going to be difficult to get right, but that doesn't mean, say it again for emphasis.
Sure. Are we recording this?
Absolutely, and I want people to hear that, because it's really important what you just said.
So it's going to be very hard to do, but it doesn't mean that people are not going to try to do it. Some people are going to fail, and some people are going to succeed, and we should spend our time ensuring that the successes are good successes, and use the knowledge we have so that it's not some guy in his garage building an app, but that person, whoever it is, she or he is informed by the best medical knowledge that we have about these things. So, people here that are listening to me should engage with people who are building these apps and trying to figure out how we can do a better job. But I think the attitude a lot of people have is that this is really hard to do, and the issues are really murky, so we're not going to do it. And what that basically means is you're not going to do it, but someone else is going to, and they're probably not going to do as good of a job as you.
You need to Velcro to the side of me and come with me, because that's what I'm trying to say. This is happening with or without you, but we would prefer it with you.
Right.
Glenn, you were wanting to say something?
Yeah, so I'm all for the cyborg approach here. And in fact, the question, the operative question that I think all of us are trying to wrestle with right now is, how do we build that app, the analysis, whatever you want to talk about, that is maximally useful for the clinician? There's a school of thought that maybe a mental health app can replace a clinician or something like that. I certainly don't agree for a second. And I think that the real objective measure is not to get the most accurate information, but it's to get the most useful information. And those are often two very different things.
Right. And it's not just to get the information, but I'm going to say, as a clinician who's used this kind of information with patients over and over again, who have high risk for suicide, of really severe emotional pain, so that when I was getting daily data about people's moods and functioning, for me to know when treatments started to be effective, for me to know, diagnostically, I was able to really do some differentials on folks that were that we wouldn't have been able to get usable data on other ways. We could adjust medications. I'm just thinking of one particular case where there were so many reasons why they were not going to be able to be have an accurate self-report, and they often did not come in because of various therapy interfering behaviors, which we would expect with folks who have mental illness issues as severe as this person's. But we were able to get daily data because the way that we set it up, we could get the data. Well, then I could look at it. Then I could talk with the nurse practitioner who could make some significant treatment adjustments, because we suddenly had diagnostic information we just didn't have before. And when we think about how difficult it can be to serve folks with really complex mental health needs in really difficult circumstances in very marginalized, underserved areas, I mean, why not, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. And then just to go to this other approach, instead of, one way we can think of this is, trying to do something with an individual patient and a relationship there with the therapist. But if you just think of the sort of traditional studies that people have done, where, for example, we want to study a therapy, so we get a lot of people to observe this therapy being administered. We write transcripts. We code that. We do some meta-level analysis. It's very time-consuming. It takes a long time. If you look online, there are these sorts of social conversations happening all the time in dedicated communities, whether or not suicide prevention forums or general mental health kind of support groups, where millions of people are engaging in these things. And the transcripts are all there and they're all public, right? So we can imagine, instead of studying therapy on this very small scale, in a very controlled way, what can we do if we want to study therapy where we have millions of conversations from lots of people where we can automate everything, and really change the nature of the questions we can ask. And I think those are findings that will also influence the sorts of therapies we're going to get. So just because it's not focused on an individual and it's aggregated population doesn't mean there's not going to be value that will make its way into a therapy session.
And I want to give you that we have sort of a cluster of remarks sort of coming in the stream.
Okay.
We have Linda Langford who goes, oh, and I don't know if Glenn, you and Mark know this, but 9 out of 10 mental health providers would not pass a basic competency test on suicide risk assessment and intervention.
Neither would I. So
right. But we're licensed to do that, and we're supposed to be the experts. If you came to us, it would be like going to a cardiologist and 9 out of 10 of them not knowing CPR.
Well, but we're not supposed to be the experts. Licensure boards don't require it. Graduate schools don't require it. So in fact, we've abdicated our expertise. So I think we've almost made a conscious decision not to be experts.
Right.
It'd be one thing if we were actually saying, hey, you need to be. Graduate schools need to train in suicide assessment and intervention, and licensure boards need to make sure that clinicians are trained in suicide assessment and intervention. But in fact, none of that's actually happening. We've actually even left it out of the the toolkit that we expect clinicians to have, which is a travesty.
And so
one of the things.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, April.
No, go ahead, April. And so, and with that in mind, when you got comments like Dr. Schmitz who says, and other people said, false positives, who cares? Bring it. At least we would be talking about it and trying to measure it objectively, which would be better than what we've been doing before with these sort of poor competency rates. And they said if we had false positives, but it spurred a conversation to check on somebody's risk, it would be worth it. And Dr. Schmitz, who took you very seriously, Glenn, about your wish list, says he would really love for you guys to develop some sort of, and I know that all of us clinicians use the word algorithm too. It just means like fancy data magic, is what algorithm means to us. But some sort of way to know when somebody is giving us a warning sign or a red flag so that we could check on them. And Bart, you were commenting? So
I think that one of the things that, and listening to Glenn and Mark talk, one of the things I think is so powerful, and it took me years to get my mind around this, I think many mental health professionals, and I think the community, thinks that people know how depressed or how close to suicide they are, how anxious they are, right? And that's not always the case. People often don't have really good insight into where they're at. Just like people often don't have good insight into their overall health or well-being. Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And when we have really good data, then we can use that data that then do collaboratively check in with people. Well, and I think using these sorts of tools in a very transparent way, hey, this is the information that I'm getting. This could indicate that you're depressed. What do you think? And using it as a conversation starter, and that's kind of one of the themes that's on the thread. Starting conversations is really what we need to do. We can use data to help us shape and start that conversation. Often we'll teach people, they'll teach us, but I just think it's an amazing tool, and there's so much potential there.
So the one thing that I've got to say, and this is perhaps more computer science and less medicine, but the way that we do these things, the way in which I would attack this problem is to build something. I know it's going to be wrong, but it's something that we can all point to and agree on and say, oh, this point is wrong, now let's refine it. And I think that's the only way that this is going to work. And that may be counter to the way that people are, that the field in general is used to dealing with these things. But it's this iterative process is, I think, the only way we're going to get better data, more useful data.
And that's one of the things that people are talking about, and I'm just going to feed this. Sometimes it's sort of we have so much happening, but this one is really gelling along a couple of themes. One of the concerns is people finding this, even though everyone sort of conceptually understands that you're just mining public data, the sense is people will find this intrusive, and it might cause people to back away from social media, and so they're worried about, in some ways, taking folks who are fragile in some ways or in a delicate place and subjecting something that they're going to experience as intrusive. And I'm wondering what you guys think about that.
We gave, I would say, a full, somewhere between a third and a half of the time we spent doing this research was thinking about the privacy and the ethical concerns around this. Like, what does it mean? How do we do this in a way? Because you're exactly right. The people that we're trying to help here are the ones that are actually the most fragile, perhaps, with respect to this. And paranoia is certainly a thing that crops up with some frequency. And so what we came down on, and we have a paper that we are currently writing that will hopefully get out there. We came up with basically the framework of the analysis and the interventions that we thought our work should support, and that we, after much conversation, think are fair. And the basic the basic tenet was that either we're going to look at things that are opt-in, and so so if we're doing anything individual level, it's opt-in, that you, the patient, and your clinician hopefully have said, I would like for you to do some analysis here and look at things, right? And so then this is not privacy intrusive. They have in fact elected for us to do that. And then at on the other side of this, at a population level, we're going to only report things in aggregates, and so that they're not. You can't ever get down to an individual person. You can't ever get smaller than something like a city. And so there's some, much like the census does, that you can't just you can't report on a single individual.
Right.
So the only way a single individual we might use this to the benefit of a single individual is if they opt in to allow it. Otherwise, the data that's actually reported and acted on is either opt-in or no more granular than a city.
Yeah,
right.
Something like that, right.
And the advantage I think we have here is that while these data are new to us, the questions are not new, and we have decades of literature and experience in the community for dealing with the ethical considerations here. So the concern you just raised about if people knew their data was being used in this way, they might be less likely to participate and use Twitter. That's exactly analogous to questions we have about use of EHR data, where when someone goes to the ER, for example, if you go to the ER, even without your knowledge, your data might be involved in some kind of study, because there are policies in place where researchers within the institution can mine electronic medical records in order to do various sorts of things. And that's been judged through a lot of discussion as a significantly low risk in terms of the people that whose records we're using, and there's a whole lot of guidelines in place about how you could do these things. So the questions that we face here are actually not new, and we have a lot of literature and experience, not personally, but in the community, for how to deal with these things. And so I think that's really important, and it's a reason why you don't want computer scientists acting alone here, where they think they're everything's new and none of this has been thought of before, right? But what we really want is to say these questions are things that we've dealt with before and we thought of, and we really have a sense of where the balance is of what are the risks that we're willing to take and what are the benefits that might result from it.
I'm going to say that again just for emphasis again, Mark, 'cause you just say things that make me fall in love with you every few minutes.
Okay.
These ethical considerations about how we use this data are really not new, clinicians.
That's right.
Just because Twitter is new and scary to you does not mean that the ethics of this are things that the health information technology crowd has not considered. In fact, they have, and a little caution and consultation will often get you the answers about how to proceed with projects that are interesting. That's my big plug.
Very well
I completely agree. And I'll tack something onto that. So another question we get often is the reliability of these methods. So people are not used to social media as a validated source of information. They're more used to things like phone surveys or clinician interviews. And so we get these questions a lot about how valid is your source. And they raise a lot of different problems. And again, those problems are not new. We've been dealing with phone survey issues since Dewey versus Truman. And we have a huge literature of how to overcome bias and how you frame the question. I mean, if you've ever studied phone surveys, you know that they're not reliable, and there's a lot you have to do to make sure they're accurate. And so the same thing is true with this data. You can't just take it and look for a bunch of keywords and conclude that what you've identified is scientifically valid. There's a lot of biases and there's a lot of issues, but we know this and we know how to deal with these things. And they're not new questions. They're just new situations in which we're asking these questions.
And I've got a couple of comments. You're doing a great job. You're really responding to some of their concerns. Carl Dunn, and we do a big shout out to Carl Dunn. Carl Dunn does a lot of wonderful things, including a wonderful chat he moderates for folks who have borderline personality disorder, and it's beautiful, and I also just love and adore Carl. And he asks, because you're involving clinicians and data scientists, he says, to what extent are folks with lived experience of mental illness or lived experience of suicide attempt or suicide risk, how have they been involved in developing some of these projects?
That's a good question. Glenn, do you want to try?
There has been some engagement. I'm trying to tread carefully here. There has been some engagement from people that have lived through some of these things. I think I'm gonna answer this slightly differently and slightly obfuscate this for a bit. There's not a single person that was at the CL Psych workshop last year, and I'll bet you it's the same thing this year. Anyone that I have encountered in this field that's thinking about where social media and mental health, or language analysis and mental health, or computer science and mental health come together, every single one of them has either themselves or a family member or a very close friend has been affected by this. And so they've lived through some portion of a mental illness, maybe not themselves, but related to it. And so every single one of them is passionate about they remember what that felt like, and every single one of them is so passionate about this because they feel like they might be able to help prevent this in the next, in the population writ large. So I hope that sort of answered your question.
Yeah, and that was perfect. And I'm actually going to turn this to Bart to comment as a person who really does straddle in a lot of ways a couple of those worlds.
So I think that I'm glad to hear that there's that passion that folks that have been involved in this have lived experience. As a suicide attempt survivor, I can tell you there's a big difference between providers or researchers who had some lived experience but have their researcher hat on, and actually getting input from people with lived experience that are coming at it from a lived experience, a recipient standpoint. So I guess what I would coach you guys to consider. I mean, you guys are probably familiar with what happened with Radar, right? You know about Radar, and one of the hugest
Samaritan's Radar.
The Samaritan's Radar program was the hugest failure. They didn't reach out and get lived people's experience. And so I think that one of the things, because I love researchers and being a PhD, I love the passion that researchers have, but sometimes we forget that the people that we're working with are people with their own feelings, beliefs, and the lived experience movement is getting much stronger. And I think that there's some anger that's involved there because they've been so disempowered. I certainly have felt that. And I think that there's a real need to reach out formally and get very specific, organized, lived experience input from people who are coming at it from that perspective. I think that I also think that you will learn a whole lot, and then those folks, when they're included, become your best advocates, right? So that's just some things to consider, and I think that that's new. I think it's a really new concept for many researchers. In April, we had somebody on a few months back, and it was clear their project was amazing, but they really didn't get this concept of engaging the community to get input, and I think that's really important and something I just encourage you guys to consider.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's a parallel to something in computer science. When you build products, is you get user feedback and user experience with the product.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a very similar idea here, where I've seen this where the designers and the people who wrote up the specs of the program were surprised when they actually put it in the hands of someone who used it at the way it was used and the way that the needs the person had. And so I think you're absolutely right. If we were going to, and we're not going the step, if we were going to the step of building tools that we want to put in clinicians' hands or in patients' hands, then we want to definitely work in partnership with them to make sure that we're addressing exactly the concerns and needs that they have. And I would just, if anyone on here is doing that sort of work, which I think is great, I absolutely think that working with people with lived experience is a critical component of making sure your tools are useful and that they're addressing the sensitivities of people who you want to use them.
And they're really responding to this. You guys are doing a great job. We're getting into the last. I know that it's so slow and there's just so little to say, but we're getting into the last couple minutes. A couple of things that we have in questions on. Glenn, people want your dissertation posted. If it is posted anywhere, if there's any way that people can ask for it, some folks have requested it.
If you tweet at me, I'll find a way to get you a PDF. It's probably going to require me dusting off a hard drive somewhere, but I will do that.
That is I think I've got mine on some old.
Oh yeah, we won't even talk about those discs. Yeah, right.
I don't even think those discs go into anything anymore.
Hey guys, you might be surprised. I just came across my dissertation. A lot of these places they get housed, and now they're getting posted online for free. So your dissertation can be floating on there, and have a web access that you could tweet out or email out and not even know it. I found mine the other day and had no idea.
So if you'd like, you can buy mine on Amazon, or you can download it from the website.
Say where it is on Amazon, Mark.
It's also free on my website, so I would just go there.
Well, tell people where both are so they can find it, Mark.
My website is dreadsy.com, which is just my last name.com. Although my thesis has nothing to do with any of this, so you're welcome to read it, but you're not going to shed any light. But if you want to see some of the work we've been doing and some of the papers we've come out more recently, that's also on my website.
So, I can't find it at the moment, but I will promise to go find you that. I did see a couple of tweets flying by that were asking about the workshop, and I'd like to plug that for a moment. You guys would let me. Okay, good. This is near and dear to my heart. But the workshop is the Computational Linguistics and Clinical Psychology workshop, and so the website is clpsych.org. And so this is going to be a one-day workshop. It's co-located with NACL, which is the North American Association for Computational Linguistics. Is that right, Mark?
That's right.
Okay. And so that's going to be...
Who are these people again?
Yeah, I'm going to say in a minute. This is June this year, and I want to say the 7th. It's something like that. It says on the website, though. But this is the second year of this workshop. And the group that's there is a bunch of computational linguists, natural language processing people, machine learning people, however you want to phrase that, the computer science side that are interested in mental health, and then the clinicians that are most interested in seeing this applied and have the most experience with dealing with us computer scientist fools. And so we all at least last year we all co-located for a day and had just a phenomenal amount. The presentations were incredible. It's clear that there's some real energy and passion behind this subject, and so I'm really looking forward to getting together again and doing this with everyone else. This may be different than any other conference you've been at, where a lot of the papers are presented, some of them by clinicians, some of them by computer scientists, and then there's a discussion period afterwards where there's a designated person from the other side of the fence who's actually talking about these things. And so from my computer science paper last year, there was a whole bunch of clinician people that were actually discussing it and talking about the applications and the implications of it. So it's a fantastic event. You should come. It's going to be a grand old time.
So I'm going to put a plug in. Bill, go talk to the AAS people. They should send some of us. There's got to be someone among us who should be there, right, for suicide prevention. Bill and Julie Sorrell and Dave, and Dave and Mike and all of you other Michelle. This is me winking at y'all.
And if you can't make it for some reason, all the papers from last year are freely available online. And all the papers from this year will be freely available online.
Mark, can you make your next big important tweet where to find this important information?
That sounds like a great way to break your silence.
I don't think we put on the website the papers or the link for that, but we'll make sure to do that after this call.
I will do that.
So now it is time. It's sort of the end of the program, and this is the time when we sort of do final thoughts, where we think the most important take-home message. So if you did nothing but hear me go, "We're live," and then watch the last 2 minutes of the program, you're still good, right? And so we're going to do final thoughts. Who would like to chime in with what they think their big take-home message for the evening is? I'm going to go first while I give everybody else a chance to compose. I'm going to say the big take-home message, and this is one where I've been talking to everybody else, which is if you really care about making suicide no longer the 10th leading cause of death in the United States and one of the leading causes of death around the world, that one of the biggest untapped potentials for change and innovation in mental health is by collaborating with folks just like Glenn and Mark. And so I'm going to say that the best chance we have is working together and reaching out across disciplines to get this done in new and exciting ways. Because apparently it doesn't cost $1 million and it doesn't take forever, and we may be able to actually gain momentum and move the ball a little bit. So let's reach across the aisle and let's give it a shot.
Can I just ditto that one? That one's great. I'll take a slightly different one. So the formal engagement of people with lived experience. We've been doing that informally, and I think you guys are exactly right. That will probably go a very long way. And so I'm going to take that one to heart and run with it.
Oh, I'd face kiss you, but you're far away, Glenn, and you have a cold.
Yeah, in June. I'll see you in June.
I would just add that social media is going to change the mental health field. And the only question is, how are we going to be part of that change, and how are we going to steer that change towards outcomes that we think are the most positive for patients and people suffering from mental health conditions?
I agree. It's how, not if. Bart.
So my final thoughts is that I think that we're looking at the future here, being able to blend good science, good data collection, using data to correlate in a meaningful way with human behavior, and then connecting that with people who need services and those providing services. I think that's really the future. I think that Mark and Glenn are going to help us get better and find really cool tools to do this sort of thing. The other thing I'm really excited about is the emphasis on language. I think that language is so key. It tells us so much about the human behavior and human psyche, and I think there's been a lack of emphasis on language over the last 10 or 15 years, and I think we're starting to see a real recognition that language is key to understanding human behavior and helping people. So, and I think these guys are at the forefront of this, and I'm very excited and so glad they came on the show. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. This is a grand time.
We are so glad that Glenn and Mark joined us today. Thank you to Dr. Bart Andrews, who is just a thoughtful, powerful voice with us. Thank you to Stuck on Social Work, our favorite Sean. You're an amazing co-mod. Thanks to Tony Wood, who keeps us solid and keeps us organized and makes our tech run. For all of you folks, thank you. You've wasted another Sunday evening with us. We're so glad that you were here. Please do like and subscribe to the channel and so that you can keep up with all of our great SPSM videos. Comment, go to our Facebook page. It's Facebook at SPSM, and go to our website, spsmchat.com. If you like our Facebook page, you're going to keep up to date on the guests and topics that we have every week. If you don't make it on Sunday night, that's what Monday morning is for. And we are just so grateful that you're here. We'll see y'all later. Bye-bye.